guidance first of all, Cahill, because I'm obviously not happy at all with how this has progressed, and I want to follow on from Dr. MacDonald's line of questions. First of all, we as a committee have addressed a number of different issues where there was parallel examinations and investigations. In fact, in a number of instances there was criminal investigations. If you take NAMA as an example, there was 3 criminal investigations, and yet we still did our work into a loan sale that was known as Project Eagle and produced a report. The Cahill gave the example of the HSE hearings where we discussed the Grace case, and there was a commission of investigation examining that, and we also had An Garda Síochána in here, and they were carrying out examinations themselves and investigations into what happened in Templemore while we were doing our work.
European Fraud Office was as well.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to understand here is how witnesses, and by the way the Secretary-General of the department, which worries me even more, believe that they can stonewall this committee, refuse to answer questions, or put up a defence that we can't answer questions on issues because of some examination being done by, is it the department or the HEA, Mr. Ruffalo? Who commissioned Mr.
The department.
The department did. This is just a departmental examination or investigation. It has not been heard by a judge. You cannot claim it's sub judice. So I'm aghast that this has descended into what it has, and I'm seeking your guidance on this, because if this was to be the modus operandi for how this committee works in the future, we would never get anything done. And before that, I want to make a number of things clear. Mr. Rash, do you know what your role is here today? Do you know what your role is in terms of reporting back to the Public Accounts Committee? What is it?
A witness here. Excuse me.
No, you're more than a witness. Do you know what you are here?
I'm the accounting officer, the accountable officer.
You're an accountable person.
Yes.
You're actually not an accountable officer. You're an accountable person, which means you account back to the Public Accounts Committee. And you are not accounting back to the Public Accounts Committee today. You are offering up as a defence a refusal to answer questions because Mr. Thorne, who was simply appointed by the department to carry out an examination, though he gave you advice. And that's not acceptable. It's absolutely not acceptable. So I need guidance from the chair as to how we proceed. Before I get that guidance, can I ask you, did Mr. Thorne advise you not to appear before the Public Accounts Committee?
Me?
I'm talking to Mr. Rash.
Oh, sorry. No.
Mr. Ruddle, did he advise you?
No.
Well, I have been informed that he did advise you not to appear before the Public Accounts Committee. So I'm going to ask you again. You are here as a witness, so I want you to be very clear that you don't mislead this committee, because if anyone misleads the Public Accounts Committee, that is not a good place for them to be in. So I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Rash. Did Mr. Thorne advise you not to appear before the Public Accounts Committee? Did he offer that opinion at any time?
My recollection is that Mr. Thorne had concerns about us appearing here today.
Did he advise you not to appear before the public?
My recollection is he did not.
Was this yesterday's? When was this?
No, this was when he started his investigation. He advised us that he was in charge now of matters, and that we were not to discuss matters germane to the investigation anywhere.
Is that in writing?
No.
It's all verbal.
Verbal.
Now, what I want to understand, Cahill, if you can help me on this. Yeah. Since when did Mr. Thorne assume the role of advising witnesses what they should say or not say to the Public Accounts Committee? Or since when did Mr. Thorne seek in his work to subvert, I would argue, the work of the Public Accounts Committee? And I want to put this now to Mr. O'Fallou, because I can tell you now, Mr. O'Fallou, that whatever report comes from Mr. Thorne is now absolutely prejudiced. It won't be worth the paper it's written on. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board. Can I ask you first of all how Mr. Thorne was picked to carry out the examination?
Well, first of all, could I say he is an independent investigator.
Yeah, that's your view. I'll give you my view. I asked you how he was appointed.
You said his report wouldn't be worth anything. It's an independent report.
Yeah, that's my
personal I just want to put in the record that's a personal observation.
Absolutely.
It's a statutory investigation.
Yeah, it's not the view of the committee. It's a personal comment. But tell us about the procurement process for Mr. Thorne, how he came to do this. That deputy is.
We estimated the cost of the procurement process to be around.
We can't hear you.
I can't hear half what's going on.
We estimated the cost of the procurement process to be around 13,000. And we internally within the department, we identified a number of persons who might approach in relation to seeking quotations. We contacted one other person who was unavailable to undertake the inquiry, and then we contacted Dr. Thorne, who at the time was undertaking an inquiry into UL, and that was near completion.
I apologise, I haven't actually got your name. Sorry, what's your own name?
Hubert Loftus.
Loftus. Mr. Loftus, just talk me through then this process in terms of how Mr. Thorne was appointed. You said that there was a number of people that you evaluated. So, how many people?
We contacted another person to see whether they'd be available to.
Does this go up for tender?
No, given the cost involved, it wouldn't be for a public tender, to be more for quotations.
And Mr. Thorne just finished a separate report for the HEA, or was it for the department?
That was a HEA.
HEA. Is he on a retainer with the HEA and the department?
No, I wouldn't. See that. Like we invited a proposal from him, and the terms of that proposal, based on the cost per day, were similar to what was operating on the UL inquiry.
Okay. And can I say to you, Mr. O'Fallou, nobody on this committee would in any way seek to tell Mr. Thorne what he should do, how he should carry out his examination, and how he should report back to you. That's entirely a matter for the department and whatever process you have with Mr. Thorne. How is it acceptable that Mr. Thorne would believe that he can in any way dictate to this committee how we can do our job or not, and advise witnesses to come before the Public Accounts Committee, including an accountable person, accountable back to the Public Accounts Committee, what they can or cannot say? How is that acceptable in your world as Secretary-General of the Department?
He offered advice that he didn't wish to have the investigation compromised. He knew the investigation was being undertaken speedily. He is a man who I know, because he was here with you in recent months, respects the committee greatly, and who undertook a very fair and deep investigation.
Mr. O'Fallou, you're missing the point entirely, and with respect, you're avoiding the point I'm putting to you. What I'm saying to you is that we are not going to dictate to him how he carries out his review. You need to understand, as an accounting officer for the department, that we have a statutory responsibility as well to probe in terms of systems, process and procedural failures. That's our role. Regardless of whether there is parallel investigation or examination processes ongoing, that's our role, that's our function. So you need to understand here that what's happened is a person that you've appointed is attempting, and maybe not deliberately, maybe it's unintentional, but the consequence of his action is that he is subverting the work of the Public Accounts Committee. And Dr. MacDonald put questions to Mr. Rash that he is now not answering, not because of any legal advice he got, but because Mr. Thorne told him in an oral conversation, I would imagine a phone conversation, that he should not. And he said the same to Mr. Ruttall. I can't understand that. I find it deeply troubling. And I want you to understand where we're coming from.
Mr. Ruttall, do you agree with our view?
No, I don't recollect any direction from Mr. Thorne on this at all. I would not be.
Just wanted to get that.
I would be an independent-minded person on things like that. I would turn up where I want to be turned up. If I'm asked to turn up, and that's it. But I've not received any direction from Mr. Thorne whatsoever. That's just to clarify. I could hear that.
So, Mr. Ruttall, maybe I'm wrong then. Are you telling me that you did not get advice from Mr. Thorne in terms of what you can or cannot say at this committee?
No, I didn't get advice from him at all.
So, can you answer the questions for us then? Maybe we should put the questions to you and not to Mr. Rash.
Chairman, the inquiry is into the board, it's not into...
So can we start the clock again, and maybe at this point we can now put the questions to Mr Ruttall, because from what you said, not only did you not get advice on what you can and cannot say, but you are of the view that you're independent, you can speak freely, so you can help this committee, notwithstanding the accountable person's view.
Well, that's all right. I mean, I respectfully suggest that there is an investigation in progress.
So we have the same line.
No, this is a...
Sorry, with respect.
No, there's an investigation in progress. It's a very, very short timeline, Deputy. I think Dr Thorne deserves the time and the space to carry out his investigation, and certainly from my own point of view, I'm willing to be back here at any time that anyone wants me to be back here in the not-too-distant future to deal with that post the report.
Can I finish on saying this, Cahill? Look, I'm deeply frustrated, deeply annoyed with the witnesses here and with the Secretary-General of the Department. And I want clarification from you at this point. And if we have to suspend the meeting and come back to this and bring the witnesses back again at some point, we will. If we have to stay here all night, we will. Right. We are not going to have witnesses before the Public Accounts Committee either subvert this committee, prevent us from doing our job. It's not going to happen. So there is no impediment whatsoever. No impediment whatsoever for the witnesses to answer the questions that are being put. None whatsoever. No legal impediment.
I'm suggesting we'll be going to private session as members, and I think
yes.
the legal advisor in your office will be here.
Do we have to get legal advice?
They're here. So
I'm sorry, no, I don't agree with that. Yeah. We have a job to do here in public session. We have two...
We're coming back to
just let me
session.
finish, Chair, please. Yeah. We have two ETBs here before us. We have a job to do in terms of value for money and asking questions. Let that process proceed. We cannot compel a witness to answer our questions. They're here in a voluntary capacity. Obviously, they're accountable to the public accounts. Let us deal with what we have in as fair a manner as we can. I don't agree we're going into private session. I don't think there's a need to go into private session at this point. We have to deal with what's emerging with us. And the questions should be put that we need to put. It's on the record if a chairperson or a CEO can't answer. That's what we're here to do now.
I don't accept our real voluntary capacity. We're here because they're spending taxpayers' money. It's not voluntary.
Sorry, the word is voluntary in the sense of they're here to help us. They're accountable, of course. Let me finish, please. In that capacity, they're not compelled to be here at this point. And we have to deal with what we're getting. And I think we should go ahead and deal with it. We're not in a court of law. We're here to bring as much accountability as we can. And there are two ETBs here who that should be asked questions by each of us in turn.
So the Deputy is proposing we continue to put the questions, and the answers we receive will be the answers we receive. That's
I don't agree with that, because I don't think that we can do our job, and I'm not happy with that. So I think we should go into private session and discuss this.
I'm going to ask the views of the members. Do we want to just a discussion amongst ourselves, just in private session, as to how we proceed for a few moments? What do members think? I'm only asking the members now. Briefly into private session.
I prefer we stayed in public session. My preference is always for public session, but I do understand that we've hit a brick wall here, and we need to decide what we're going to do.
I'm with the previous speaker.
Bobby.
I think we need to probably at this stage get legal advice ourselves to know what we can actually do. We are after hitting the brick wall, and we seem to be going nowhere.
Okay,
so we need somewhere. We need to move this on.
As chairman, it's been suggested by a member that we get some legal advice. And legal advice is available to us now if we go into private session. And we'll do that briefly. So what happens now is when we go into private session, we have to clear the room for ourselves to have our own private discussion, and I'll ask you to be on hand for the end of the private session.
To leave your stuff here.
Yeah, you can all leave your documents here. We're now back in public session, and after that brief discussion in private session in relation to our questions to Kildare Wicklow ETB, we had a private meeting amongst our members and got the benefit of legal advice during that private session. And we're continuing to proceed with our meeting, but I do want to remind the witnesses that you are here in a voluntary capacity. You are not compelled, and you are free at any time to leave. You're here of your own volition. You're not here compelled. We will continue to put questions, and our understanding is that there is no legal. Our advice is there's no legal impediment to you answering questions. That's our legal advice. And at this stage, I do want to apologise to everybody for the late hours, especially the people from Tipperary who haven't had an opportunity to have some of their issues discussed to date. And I'm just... And, yeah, there's a second half. And we're carrying on with the meeting, and the speakers have indicated in the following sequence: Alan Kelly, Catherine Connolly, Catherine Murphy and Bobby Aylward. So the next speaker, and there are two ETBs in front of us here, so members are free to put questions to whichever or both ETBs as they choose. We're giving you that's the benefit of and the outcome of our meeting in private session. Deputy Kelly.
Thank you, Chair.